Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the ECM podcast. I'm Caroline Fontanieu, and I'm very happy to host this series that will take you behind the scenes of new music on ECM Records. In this new episode, I'm meeting over Zoom with German-American pianist Benny Lackner to discuss his latest ECM album, Spindrift, recorded with Matthias Eick, Mark Turner, Linda Mehan-O, and Matthieu Chazarenc, and produced by Manfred Eicher. Benny talks about dynamics in the band, creative process and routine, the healing properties of music, and so much more. Benny Lackner, do you want me to call you Benny or do you want me to call you Benjamin?
Benny's fine.
Okay. We left you 2 years ago with Last Decade, and there was some kind of looking back a little bit. You were looking back at the last decades before you recorded all this.
Yeah.
And now you're back with Spindrift. Well, first of all, are we looking ahead this time?
Well, the term Spindrift kind of was an association I had while traveling through California. A lot of my titles always come from California because I'm half Californian, half German. And it was a turbulent time the last 2 years. So I don't think it's looking ahead. It's about processing the last 2 years since the last album. And Spindrift is kind of from my interpretation, it's kind of a small, controlled chaos with a calm center. And that's sort of what I strive for, is to keep calm no matter what's going on.
I like this concept of controlled chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like everyone is kind of dealing with that, right? Like just dealing with how agitated is the world around us and how to keep our center centered.
Yeah.
I had to look up the word spindrift because I didn't know that word. English is not my first language, as you know. So yeah, I was wondering what it symbolized for you. But for me, I heard it and I read it and I saw it as something very hopeful, like the water is life. The spray from a wave is something that is very, like, they can go any direction, that's free. We cannot really control it, right? So there was something very hopeful for me in this image, but I heard you saying and I read you saying that those last 2 years have been pretty scary.
Yeah.
You used the word fear and sadness. So is it all about that in the end, just like juggling with those things?
No, I'm not a depressed person. I'm actually very positive. I wake up and for me, actually, life is great and I'm very privileged and I have a wonderful life and family. But it's about keeping that calm center and pursuing my work every day. I write every day. I have this routine, and I've actually tried to make the creative process into an experience that correlates with family life, because it's not a day job for me, but I try to force it into certain hours of the day. So like from 8 to 4 p.m. And then I'm home for the family unless I'm on tour. And just through having this routine, like since before I had kids, I was actually kind of chaotic. And through creating this schedule, I'm totally out of my element if I'm not in my studio on a Tuesday at 10 in the morning. I don't actually know what to do with myself. So, I mean, it's like this routine calms me down.
That made you so prolific in the last few years, because you have this routine, you have this schedule and this practice. I think you wrote like so many songs, so many tracks, over 100, right?
Yeah, for each album.
That's
But that doesn't mean that's 100 keepers,
No, obviously that would be long. But we're gonna talk about it. But we talk a lot about practicing the instrument, and in your case, practicing the piano. But we don't talk about practicing writing. So I want you to talk to me a little bit more about your routine and this creative process that you're talking about, because beyond the time, like the hours, the scheduling of it, what do you do? How do you write? What inspires you? What's your technique? Like, what is your routine?
I mean, I'm actually not a guy that practices Buddhism or anything, but I think since the pandemic, I came up with this hour, or it's a few hours where I don't judge whatever's happening by the piano. No matter what I write, I start and I finish an entire song in one day.
Like automatic writing kind of technique.
Yeah, but it's at the piano and I try to sing or hear every note before I play it. Then I double check, of course, and then I create the chords and I don't judge. I let it sit. Do you know David Sedaris? This is totally random, but David Sedaris said in an interview a few years ago that he writes something and then he lets it sit for a month. And that resonated with me because even after a gig, I don't actually know if it was anything that was special or good. I have to wait and then listen to a recording a couple weeks later when the emotional stuff has settled down. So usually, I have this really strict routine where I record the demo of the song I write. And the same day, I kind of play fake drums and I listen to it like 10 days after.
You record the whole thing, like you almost produce the whole thing. You
Yeah.
play the drums and your bass line and your melody and
Mhm.
wow, okay.
Because I learned from Prince, who I never met in person, but he had this interesting thing where he said it's really important to finish a song. Otherwise, you have 1,000 half-finished ideas and songs, and then I'm at the end of the day, that's too confusing for me. So I write a song and then I decide 10 days later if it's a keeper or not. And then obviously, then you show up in the studio with something that's been distilled down. It's like 20 songs that I'm happy with, and then 10 end up on the album, usually.
Yeah, that's a big sorting and choice process that's probably very difficult, but I'm sure that some of them are happening organically. Do you come up with titles or they come to you after?
They come right as I'm writing the song.
Got it. Yeah. I can
Mhm.
picture your little folder with all those songs and just like the same way you're planting a seed, you're just letting it sit for like a couple weeks and then it's coming back. Um, for Spindrift, did you write all the songs with a quintet in your ears, and
Mhm.
especially this one, or
Yeah.
was it like
I had a conversation with Manfred in the garden when we were recording last decade, and we were talking about Mark Turner,
yeah,
and before Mark even ever agreed, I started imagining Matthias Eick's sound and Mark's sound together,
yeah,
and in my head it sounded amazing already, and I mean not my songs, the combination of their sound, and
yeah.
it worked. It worked out.
Yeah, I was listening to the music last week and it felt so obvious that I was absolutely convinced that I heard them together before. And I was looking through the ECM website, being like, on what album can it be? Because like I know the work of Matthias with Manu Katché, so I was just thinking maybe that's no, they never had played together.
Yeah.
But listening to their voices together made so much sense. That was very obvious. So good job on this, Benny and Manfred. But yeah, you had Matthieu and Linda and Matthias and Mark in your head when you wrote all those 100, then 20, then 10 songs.
Yeah.
So you had worked with Matthias, you had worked with Matthieu, and you had never really worked with Mark and Linda.
Never, ever.
It
I
worked.
met Mark Turner in New York briefly, but never met Linda. But I hadn't played music with either of them, yeah.
That's not a given. Like sometimes on the personal level or on a vibe level, like some things cannot match and it just can be like, yeah, cool. I mean, they're great. They're great musicians, but well, I'm glad that it didn't happen like that and it was just like easy,
It was
but
incredible. And
yeah.
I mean, they actually said yes before I think before they even heard any of my music.
Wow, cool.
Probably was it because it's an ECM project, but
Or because your music is cool.
I didn't show them the stuff they were going to record until later. So it was just amazing. And they both, Mark and Linda, came in from the States, the night before. And I came in from LA 2 days before. And Matthias from Oslo and Matthieu was from Paris. So that wasn't that big of a drive. But yeah, meeting and coming in from different time zones, from different part of the world, it's always exciting to see if everything actually works, and it did.
And that's the magic of a room like the studio, and especially at La Buissonne, which is
Yeah.
so like in the middle of nowhere and protected from the external world, and
Mhm.
that's exactly what you're saying. That's the magic of this. Was Manfred there?
Yeah, he was there.
How was that? Was he giving a lot of direction or just being like his self, being like just one word and that gave the perfect direction for everything? Like what?
That's pretty much how it was for both albums. Especially on the first day, he gave us a lot of space to get to know each other. And then like the master he is, he got involved when he actually has this ability to, I can just tell by his body language if he's into the take or not. He can't hide it actually.
Yeah.
And it makes it
Um,
very
yeah.
easy to work with him because you walk into the listening booth after each take and it's apparent that he either likes it or not. And if he likes it, then it's usually the one that the whole band agrees on. There was never actually one take that one of us, wanted and the other ones didn't. So,
Cool.
and he's part of the band at that point. He's like a sextet.
Looking back at the last decade, you said that you came into the studio with a too cerebral approach, you said.
Yeah.
Um, did that push you to be as organic or more like free? I don't know. I don't know what's the opposite of cerebral, but I guess something that is more in the emotion or in the feelings of like, physically what it feels or just the vibe. Like, was it
Well,
something that pushed you to be a little bit more attentive to this?
well, what happened was during the pandemic, I wrote everything for the last decade completely isolated,
Yeah.
and I sent the music to the musicians. But I overdid it, like in terms of I used the computer too much, and I learned really quickly to simplify charts actually, and write them in a way that gives everyone more room. So
Mm.
it was kind of a crash course in how to write for my own music. I learned a lot during the first ECM record. And also, compared to the 6 or 7 other records I did before ECM, which were totally overproduced, because we would spend way too much time and used way too many overdubs. So that this organic approach that Manfred uses in the studio is something I never want to ever not do anymore, just to capture that live performance in the studio.
Yeah.
So having the fact that I did that once completely changed the way of preparing for the second session. Yes. It
Yeah.
basically just made me write everything simpler and just write a tune rather than a super complicated odd meter thing because especially if you're meeting for the first time in the studio, I think it's really important that the music isn't too complicated.
I mean, it depends. It could be like super written and super complicated, and everybody's just following a chart in a very, very like good student way where you just like don't really think about that's another vibe that's possible, but that's definitely not what you wanted because you wanted it to be like a band.
Maybe it's because of how I play, but that's not the kind of music I gravitate towards.
on Last Decade, the album opens with Where Do We Go From Here, which I think was thought as the last track of the album.
Yes.
And here we end with Out of the Fog. So it's a very hopeful message, isn't it?
Yeah. See, that's the genius of Manfred. He's in charge of sequencing. Yeah. I mean, he obviously lets me hear his sequence, and we send different ideas back and forth, but I haven't thought of that it ends on a positive note and the fog has been lifted. Yes, thank you.
Good news.
Good news.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know what the world's gonna be in 2 weeks or 2 months or 2 years, but here's to hope.
Yeah.
I just want to take a second to talk about your double background, and because obviously, like in this band, you have people from the US, you have people from Europe, and you grew up with a German parent and American parents. So you're from LA, you grew up in California, and then you went to New York for a while, right?
10 years, yeah.
And then you moved to Germany.
Yep.
And you were saying that there was something that was very difficult with, I don't know if it was the US one, or at least the New York scene, but there was something really hard for you to find yourself. And that the space that was given to you in Europe, in some ways, allowed you to find yourself and find your voice. I found it interesting because I want to hear more about that, because I wonder if it's just an age thing that happened to be just like when you moved. Can I ask you about this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to talk about a few things that were confusing as a jazz musician. I met Brad Meldau when I was 18, and I was studying with Charlie Hayden in Cal Arts in California. So then it took me a while to figure out what to do that is not Brad Meldau. Since I was 14, I'd been actually planning on somehow meeting Manfred Eicher, because I started playing because of Keith Jarrett. And all these things got confusing when I moved to New York, because I realized I had to actually go back in jazz history and learn how to play like Wynton Kelly and Red Garland before I could even pursue my own thing. Meaning I felt inadequate in certain historic jazz abilities. And eventually, just the hustle of trying to make it in terms of everyday life in New York, for after 10 years, it was like, okay, learn how to say no to projects. And I've been on tour with my own band in Europe the whole time, but just on a small level. And then once I moved to Berlin, I had all this freedom because everything was cheaper. I had my own studio, and I didn't feel like I had to meet up to any expectations. I think the most organic title that I never even thought about that just happened was See You Again, My Friend. And I wrote it after someone very close to me passed away. I wrote it the next day. And that's the song I'm emotionally most attached to from this record.
Yeah.
It's sometimes it just happens that you don't even notice that it's happening. You just write something and then it's actually one of the keepers. Those are the best moments, and they actually help you get through grief. And yeah, that was just a meaningful song to me. Yeah.
Can we say that music can heal?
Yeah, it can help. Definitely. And that's the whole thing about the routine. If I didn't have that, I don't know what I would be doing.
album Spindrift. Thank you for joining, choosing, and listening to our ECM podcast. I'm Caroline Fontanieu, and I look forward to sharing more music with you in the next episode.